Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad to see some familiar faces and some new ones as well. I'm Jillian Forsberg. I'm the author of The Rhino Keeper, a historical fiction novel based on a true story. And I do have a master's degree from Wichita State's public history program, but I also have a communication and history degree from McPherson College. And I'm very proud of that. Thank you. Yeah. I've always been a writer, and this is my first novel. The story I'm about to tell you is a real one, and when I first learned of it, I was struck with wonder and awe. This is that story. What about Clara and how she inspired a novel? We're gonna get there, and it's on. There we go, perfect. So in 2020, my husband and then 5-year-old daughter and I were making our way back from a socially distanced wedding reception in Manhattan, Kansas. We saw signs for the Rolling Hills Zoo outside of Salina, and we decided we were going to stop. We took respite from the biting Kansas cold in the Rhino Barn, where I first saw that creature. I don't know if you've ever seen an Indian or one-horned rhino, but that's Joya. Now, sadly, Joya died in 2023, but I had only ever seen African rhinos before, and that thing was massive. 6 foot at the shoulder, stomping, kicking the cage, ready for his keepers to do, of course, spray him with a hose. That's what he wanted at that time. I was just awestruck by this animal, and I asked the keepers tons of questions about him, how old he was, what kind of rhino he was, and I could not stop thinking about this guy on the way home. So being the huge history nerd that I am, I Wikipedia'd Indian rhinos. At the bottom of the Wikipedia article was a stub, which means it's a tiny article. There's usually not much about those. And when I clicked the link, I just remember my arms just rippling with goosebumps because I saw that. That is Clara, the Indian rhino. And from the moment that I saw that life-size image of her that was on display in Rotterdam for many years, I was absolutely awestruck. Why on earth would anyone want to make a life-size image of an Indian rhino? And how on earth did she get the name Clara? And why was she in Europe? Once again, this was a stub Wikipedia article, which means there wasn't a ton of information there. So I scrolled down to the bottom, hoping for, something more. And I found it. 2 picture books, 1 nonfiction book, and I immediately added it to my Amazon cart. Amazon Prime that book right over to me, and I devoured a book written by a historian named Glynis Ridley. It was called Clara's Grand Tour. And once again, I'm just awestruck, just captured by the story. How does a rhino like that end up in Europe? Well, that's something that I figured out in the book. But then I wanted more. I desperately wanted to read a novel about her, and there wasn't one. She was the subject of artist paintbrushes, porcelain sculptures, medals, posters, and I couldn't believe there wasn't more about this incredible story out there. She actually changed the history of her own species in Europe. This is how. That on the bottom is Dürer's rhino. Now, Albert Dürer was one of my favorite artists. He drew incredible animal portraits and self-portraits in the Middle Ages. And in 1515, you can see that little date above the word rhinoceros. He created that. Now, on top is Joya. You can see there are some similarities, but if I told you he made amazing and very accurate animal portraits, you would say, Jillian, the one on the bottom looks really strange. That's because Albert Dürer never actually saw a live rhino. He got that image based on a description from a sea captain and a sketch in a captain's log. That rhino actually died in a shipwreck off the coast of Portugal before it made landfall in Europe. Now, sadly, I know that Indian rhinos are really strong swimmers, and most likely, if that animal's legs wouldn't have been shackled together, he would have made it to shore. So, the history of the rhino starts out with an inaccurate animal image and a really sad story, but that is considered one of the first viral images. It was so incredible to see something like that it was reproduced hundreds of times. If you looked up an encyclopedia image of rhino from the year 1515 until 1740, that is what you would see. Something that was wrong. And something else that was wrong was they thought that rhinos were violent, charging, man-eating beasts who were the mortal enemies of elephants. No, they're really not. They're actually more like big dogs. But unfortunately, when you have a collective society that tells you that's how things are, and you have an image that pervades itself over and over again, that is what becomes the norm. So when Clara rolled into town, things started to change. So Clara, that's a baby rhino Tanganyika, by the way. Clara was born in Calcutta, India, in about 1735 to 1738. Her mother was killed by hunters, most likely in a game put on by the Mughals, and her horn was likely sold at a market. That left her. Cute little thing. How do you get a rhino from Calcutta to Europe? Well, on one of those, of course. Just put a baby rhino on a three-masted ship for a 6-month sea voyage. It can't be that hard, right? So the ship that Clara was part of was called the Nappenhof. It was a three-masted ship, part of one of the largest organizations in the world at the time called the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. I'm actually wearing one of their coins. This is one of the first companies to mint their own coins. This is given to me by Professor Kenyon, who's in the audience today. So Clara's legacy really started with the VOC. The VOC was really important, not just for trade, but also for introducing people to things that they had never heard about before. And when Clara got on that boat and actually made it around the Horn of Africa in a precarious sea voyage that really killed a lot of people and animals, she was treated like royalty. How do we know this? Well, because she made it. Unfortunately, there was no captain's log left behind that talked about Clara. But we know that she was there, and she was part of the ship's manifest, one baby Indian rhino. So you have to remember here, the 18th century was the age of enlightenment. One where people were desperate, thirsty for new knowledge, new things. This is a seeking of the world outside of their own neighborhoods. The trend of curios and menageries grew, and a growing middle class who had more time to think and read and write. Those people made great change. And interestingly enough, when Clara landed in Holland for the first time and a real image was made of her likeness, you'll see a stark contrast between her and Durer's rhino. Clara was part of an anatomy book. This was published in Rotterdam in about 1740. The University of Leiden decided they were going to put together an anatomy book, and they were just going to have this animal in the background. No specific reason. The book sold out. They got a taste of what a rhino was really like. Now look at that image. Does that look like a charging, violent, man-eating beast to you? It does it to me. She's got soft downturned eyes, a dull horn. Her ears are kind of pushed back. And when you see the front and the back of her, you can see again, Durer wasn't completely wrong. You got three-toed feet, you got funny skin, you got a tail with a weird little tuft. But really what this image did was correct some things. By not showing her as violent, it showed that the character of the animal was different than what we assumed. And by not showing her as Durer's rhino, it also showed us we had a lot to learn. And what came next was pretty astounding. Rhinomania. Come on in, I see some friends. Hi, friends.
Use the train.
Isn't that the case in Newton, Kansas? So what came next was pretty astounding. We have rhino art. We have broadsides. We have clocks. We have incredible images like this, and it took me a while to figure this out, but on the left-hand side there, you can see what looks like a wheel. That's Clara's cart. That is what she traveled Europe in. You can also see someone showing that her skin kind of lifts up from where her folds are. People paid to touch her. People paid to sculpt her. See how now she's turning into Durer's rhino, right? That was the common image. That's how you drew people in for this crowd. You can also see how she was the subject of many different kinds of art. That's a pretty incredible detailed painting. Her cart is in the background there again. Lots of fancy people there too, right? They also made porcelain, medals, stamps, all kinds of things. She was really, really famous, and all of these people wanted a piece of Clara. The fanciest royals had porcelain and portraits, and even hairstyles known as les rhinoceros. Clara became a traveling wonder beast, kind of like a traveling circus. And the crowds that grew toward her were not just royalty and rich people. You could also pay what you wanted to feed her, or if you brought your own produce, you could feed her that too. So from Clara's portraits, we also get a portrait of that guy. Oh, hold on, I skipped too forward. Of that guy in the back. That is a debatable pronunciation of his name. So I talked to several people about how to say that name. It's written a little more clearly there for you on the bottom. The British expert on Clara, who wrote the first book about her, says that his name is pronounced Dumont. But I listened to someone who was on Dutch Idol about how to say his name, and he says that he pronounces his name Dow. And then other people have said it that way. And I really wish I could go back to 1740 and ask this guy how he said his name, but unfortunately I could not. Therefore, I've always called him Do, and that's what he will be to me. If someone can find Dumont Vandermeer and tell me how he said his name, please let me know. It's not the best name for a main character, just gonna tell you that. But I didn't change it, because he's a real guy. So the portrait that we have of him is that one up there. What do we know about Dumont Vandermeer? Well, we know that he was a ship captain. We know that he joined the VOC when he was 15 years old and spent most of his adult life on a ship. When he was 35, he bought Clara and became the captain of the Napenhof. And just before the VOC really went badly in India, he escaped the VOC and dedicated his life to a rhino. But here's the thing that struck me about him. This guy had it all. He had a traveling wonder beast, he had money, he had fame, and after her death in 1758, he completely disappeared from the historical record until his own death in 1775. Why? Why didn't he get another animal? Why didn't he open up a menagerie? Why didn't he do something else at the courts in Europe where he was very well known? I mean, his name is there, like even his birthday, you can see that. He was born April 12th, 1705. Why did he just completely disappear? Well, the romantic in me believes it's because his life was fulfilled. He was ready to settle down. He didn't need anything more than Clara. And as the few rhino keepers here in the room know, they can give you a lot of satisfaction, kind of like giant dogs. The romantic in me also believes that he looked like Eddie Redmayne, so you can take from this what you look like. So I couldn't write a book with all these royals and one main captain character and Clara the rhino and not have a sidekick. And these two pictures stuck out to me like nobody's business. See that guy? See him? That is Zubin. I wish I could tell you who he really was. But by having these images in my head while I was writing, I do believe that whoever this little soul was with his ornery and inquisitive face, caring for Clara and looking at her with such admiration, and safe inside of her pen when everyone else is outside of it, he must have had a special connection to this animal. I kind of believe that I'm doing whoever this was a service by not forgetting who he was and his importance in caring for wild animals that are attempted to be domesticated at this point. So I have Rhino, art, a time period, and a mysterious Eddie Redmayne inspired ship captain, and a few other characters from paintings. So now I got to make a book from all this. Clara became a sensation, and in my mind, she just lived. So I had to figure out how to write a novel based on few sources. Remember, dude didn't leave a journal. There was no captain's log. There's absolutely nothing that he left behind besides like a land deed and a marriage certificate. So I had to create a map of the documented places and times based on those broadsides. Those posters that he left behind at dates, places, all the people that he was going to see, and that was my map. So I used a historian's knowledge, lots of JSTOR stolen from my husband's Wichita state account, and imagination to fill in the gaps. And then I made a map. Actually, my friend Annika made this map, but I told her all the places that Clara stopped in 18 years when she toured Europe. But it's not really at the stops where things happen. It's the dotted lines. It's the in-betweens. Those are where the stories actually are. Those are the cities, towns, villages, places like Schönbrunn and Versailles. Sure, those are the things that we know, but what don't we know? The answer was, we don't know how hard it was for a ship captain to care for a 5,000-pound animal in Europe. Think about this too. This is not 2024, right? We're talking this is 1740. You have cobbled streets, dirt roads, mountain passes, barges, a three-masted ship. There was adventure on those dotted lines, but there were also many, many problems. The fact that Clara survived any of this is actually remarkable. So I also had to figure out, what the heck is a rhino like? And I had to go meet them myself. You know, I can go online and see rhino pictures and hear rhino noises, which they do make, by the way. If you've never heard a rhino squeak, you really should. But I knew by looking at Albert Durer's moon-cobbled skin and all the images of Clara that I would not be doing her legacy any kind of service if I didn't go and feed a rhino and touch their horn and see their tufted ears. So I met keepers, real ones, and a lot of them had no idea that Clara existed. And that was actually pretty special to me to say 1740s people were doing exactly what you're doing with no clue. And caring for an animal of any kind is kind of like that. All of them have their tendencies and specialness. You get a new puppy and you know that puppy's not going to be like the last puppy. But the legacy of what Clara's keeper left behind was the start of animal care for these creatures in Europe, which was actually pretty special. I've rubbed their rough skin and watched their padded feet rolled, squished under them, watched them navigate the joy of trying to squish a watermelon open with their horn, which is not an easy thing to do when you don't have very good vision. I've seen them come when they're called and recognize their keepers, open their mouths on command, step up onto a box for a blood draw. They are incredible creatures. They're worthy of love. They're able to be trained. They love us just like we love them if they're treated properly. They're goofy, playful, and quite frankly, I think that them and Clara were all misunderstood. But she lived longer than any rhino in captivity for centuries. There were 2 rhinos that were taken on the same voyage as her in the 1730s, and they lived in a London zoo for 6 months. How did he keep her alive for 18 years? The answer for me is they must have been bonded. So you might be thinking, well, what happened to her? Where'd she go? What happened to her horn? That's valuable. And even today on the black market, rhino horn sells for more than gold. It's not magic, by the way. It's keratin, it's like fingernails, and it's really creepy to think that people want to eat that. Don't do it. Well, Clara was a big girl when she died. And this was the last broadside made about Clara. Thank the Lord it's in English. I can read this one and I didn't have to use Google Translate to help me. So it says, to be seen at the Horse and Groom in Lambeth Marsh, the surprising, great, and noble animal called rhinoceros, alive. But unfortunately, in 1758, someone went down the stairs to the stable of that London pub and came to wake her for a morning of wowing children and making the royals and everyone else gasp and feed her carrots and onions, bread, which they weren't supposed to feed her, and her skin was cold and she was gone. So what does the Rhino Keeper do with a 5,000-pound animal carcass? He called the university and they came to get her. He still had in possession her horn. To my knowledge, and all of the digging that I have done, I have found no evidence that that horn was sold at auction or that it's in any museum. I have no idea where it is. And that inspired a second part of this book. Where is Clara's skeleton? If a university hauled her away, it's got to be somewhere, right? And unfortunately, London was hit really hard during World War II. There is a museum that in the early 1900s took that picture. The black and white one on the left. That's an Indian rhino skeleton. The records of that one were pretty much destroyed during the bombing of London during World War II, so they don't exactly know where it came from, but they know it's really, really old. Is it her? You're gonna have to read the book and find out. Where's that horn? That is why there is a modern historian in this book who's seeking answers. She is discovering alongside you, where is this skeleton? Where is this horn? What happened to this animal that wowed all of these crowds? It's a pretty incredible thing to think that even 300 years ago, we had bonds with animals like this. And then last year, I did one of the most special things I've ever done. That's me on the right-hand side. And last year on September 22nd, for those of you who don't know, that is World Rhino Day. Mark it in your calendars, people. I went to the pub where Clara died. It's a simple London pub. It was around 11 in the morning. I pulled on the door and guess what? They were closed. I asked several strangers to take my photo in front of it, and they looked at me like I was absolutely insane. I finally found a nice woman who wasn't hustling away to take my photo. Thank you so much, ma'am. I gathered a white pigeon feather from there that sits on a candle stand at my house, and I thought about the moment that someone did walk down those stairs and find Clara no longer alive. It was so singular for me. I don't think that 250 years later, someone would be standing in this spot feeling what her keeper felt, but there I was, feeling everything that I'm sure they felt, and watching the Thames roll by and the seagulls and London just rolling around you, not thinking about what emotion and honesty and just beautiful animal connection was in that place. Why did Dumont Vandermeer disappear from the historical record? I don't know if he had much more that he needed to do with his life. He traveled the world with the Wonder Beast. So, what happened after I wrote this novel and had all these emotional things that happened to me? Well, what happens with every novel? Rejection. Luckily, I handled it pretty well and I decided to make a rejection project. For every rejection I got for this novel, I painted a flower on a white picket fence. You want to know a secret? The back is also covered. There's like 60 of them. But then I had a small publisher who said, we want this. This is wonderful. And there it is. Oh, the Rhino Keeper in front of my rejection fence, if you didn't catch on to that. I'm so glad that I didn't give up on this story. It truly means a lot to me to have Clara's legacy live on 265 years after her death. I don't think that my cats are going to have that kind of legacy, right? Think about an animal you've loved. Like, no one else is going to know how much you've loved that animal except for you. Yeah, but she exists in the collective memory, not only of us when we read this book, but of all the people who walk by a piece of rhino art in a museum and say, what the heck is that? Well, it's probably Clara. So for those of you about to embark on this new journey, you now know what you're getting into. Story of love of all kinds, adventure, mystery, woven around a real animal and the keeper who loved her. I hope you love her too. She was a really special girl. And I hope you can also meet a rhino and feel connected to the same kind of creature whose wide three-toed feet traipse the deck of a ship, and the floors of palaces and taverns and cobbled streets and mountain passes and barges and even a canal on Venice. Remarkable, isn't it? To know we can connect with the past with our minds and words on a page. From a zoo in Salina, Kansas to the deck of an 18th century ship. Now you know why I just couldn't give up on this story. Clara's remarkable. Thanks, friends. Answer questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a mic. If I can come to you with the mic. Those of you watching on Zoom and Facebook, you can type your questions and I will see them, and then I will pose them to Jillian as well.
Cool. Yes.
And in the olden days, as my grandsons like to say, a number of people, rich, powerful people, kept menageries.
Yes.
I think Nero did, and some Persian kings and Babylonian kings and so forth. Do you know if any of them had rhinos?
They did. This is a sad story, and when I was first researching this, I thought maybe I could make a comparison here. There was a rhino in about the 1600s, female. I believe she was in Portugal or in Spain, and they couldn't control her, so they purposefully blinded her. And then later on, during the French Revolution, so spoiler, this is fact, so I'm not going to spoil too much for you. The real history is that Clara the rhino was offered for sale at Versailles. So King Louis XV had the opportunity to buy her to put in his own menagerie. He said no. And then later on, his son Louis XVI of the Revolutionary Louis, he ended up, well, it's actually his grandson, but anyway, he got a rhino for the menagerie there. And another sad story, the revolutionaries actually slaughtered it with swords. So this is the only positive rhino story that I can come up with from menageries. But the fact that her keeper didn't sell her to a menagerie right when he landed in Europe is actually pretty remarkable. He could have gotten a very large sum of money for her and then be unburdened from her care. So after that time period, most of the royal menageries had more idea of how to care for rhinos. The menagerie at Versailles was a pretty remarkable place. A lot of animal husbandry comes from trial and error and experimental things. They were able to make manuals on how to care for animals like Clara. And through the 19th centuries, things did become much easier. But as far as successful menagerie rhinos, I haven't really found a happy story yet. Yes.
Can you talk about how you were able to talk to people that took care of rhinos and how you were able to be close enough to touch a rhino?
There are actually some rhino keepers here in the audience. If you are a rhino keeper or have been at one point in time, can you raise your hand, please? Yeah. So the answer is you have to ask. There are actually rhino encounters both at the Sedgwick County Zoo and Tanganyika. Rhinos love to be fed. If you're going to feed them carrots, apples, watermelons, bananas, they will very gladly open their mouth for you. There's nothing like being slimed by a rhino hand. So the first thing that I had to do was just ask. I called the Sedgwick County Zoo. I talked to Tanganyika. I'm like, hi, I'm a crazy person trying to write a rhino book. And they're like, what? Sure, come on over. It was that easy. But I think once you like kind of legitimize yourself and say, have you heard about this? and that was Clara the rhino. Their interest was piqued enough for me to say, you know, I have respect for these animals. I'm going to come in here with respect. This book is about conservation in a way. They are the strangest creatures, because I think all of us probably have that ancient image of a charging violent rhino in our heads. And yes, they are dangerous because they're large and you do have to be careful around them. But I just slipped my hand through the bars and patted them like a dog. In fact, on BB the rhino, who sadly passed last year, her keeper Kayla was like, just shake her more and feel what it's like. I wobbled that thing. It's just so strange. It feels like it could fall off in your hands. So if you get an opportunity to go to those zoos, sign up for a rhino encounter. They're truly one of a kind. You're going to leave with a completely different perspective of the animal. Yeah.
Speaking of conservation preservation, there's a ranch in Texas which is breeding white rhinos, and they've got more than there are anyplace else combined. And do you know how that program is going?
I know there's also another rhino facility in Africa that's attempting to sell right now. So the problem becomes, there's this debate amongst zoos, conservationists, and poachers. Do you legalize the trade of rhino horn? Do we farm these animals so that we can legalize rhino horn and basically make it so it's no longer a black market item? There's going to be two camps of thought on that. One is absolutely not, and one is sure, let's try it so we can save these wild animals. Any large land species, which is called the keystone species, it actually is extremely important in conservation for those to be able to breed in any way, shape, or form. In the early 1900s, there were fewer than 100 Indian rhinos left. And now in the wild, there's about 4,000. So knowing that we have done that work, and one of the rhinos at Tanganyika was born of artificial insemination, that is a remarkable thing for the species to be able to successfully breed without damage. So for me, it's like any way that you can get a rhino baby in the world, especially a female, get a rhino baby in the world.
I was, I went to the History Through Fiction website, and the mission of this publisher is really pretty interesting. Could you maybe tell us about that and the kind of books that they want to publish and how your book fits in? Is like what makes this publish? You know, this history through fiction. And
yeah.
What's different about that?
Yeah. Well. When I first had my classes at McPherson College, I was like, this is kind of like People magazine in the 1800s. Like, I kind of like this. Like, it's just all rumors and storytelling, right? And I was presented history in a way that was really dynamic. It wasn't, you have to memorize how many people died in this battle. It was these incredible stories about real people that came to life right in front of me. So I was hooked. And when I went to McPherson, I was not a history major. I got a double major because I loved the classes that Kenyon taught so much. But I never really liked the boring parts of history. I like pirates and witches and animals and rhinos and all kinds of weird, quirky stuff. Things that are probably not going to be on the AP history exam. And this story was one of those. The mission of History Through Fiction is to publish historical novels that are based on real people. And Dumont Vandermeer was a real person. They want real events, real things. You could write a historical fiction novel based in the 90s right now. I know that's terrible, but that is considered historical fiction. Thank you. I see some tongue sticking out. Right, but that's not what this publisher wants. This publisher wants true untold stories, you know, or things that are well known that have a different spin on it. So really their mission is to get people more interested in history by telling them these true stories through fictional narratives. You can submit to them any kind of manuscript, but what they're looking for is something super compelling that's going to get people to be more interested in these specific time periods. That's one of the things with writing historical fiction is I had to delve through so much to get to the nuggets. The first original version of this manuscript was 138,000 words. There was a ton of history in there. Published is 94,000. That's how much history I cut out, friends. So the publisher's been really incredible for me. It's been one of those things where I'm like, is there enough truth in this? And he said, remember how I talked about the dotted lines in between the places? I said, well, if you don't know the truth, the story is still worth telling. You better make it up, which is probably why there's only one book about Clara, right? Yeah, it's a really great publisher. They also have like a grab bag, so you can get 3 books for like a special deal. So there's some really incredible titles on their website.
what was your time frame with this? Because it's a very consuming kind of research, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I'm one of those writers who will write as I research because I will forget everything if I don't. I'm kind of like a hamster. I just go on my wheel, but then I'll forget what I was doing and wander off somewhere else. So if I'm like in Versailles with doing Clara, I have to research Versailles right then and there. So I write and research at the same time when I write. So every morning I wake up at 6, I exercise, and from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. before my beautiful child over there is awake, I write. I work on a deadline for myself. I get an hour a day. So I started researching this book in the fall of 2021 and finished it in 2022 and got my publishing contract in 2023. And here we are today. It was pretty lickety split. A lot of books take 3 or 4 years to actually come out once they've had the contract signed. So I was pretty lucky. Basically year to date after I signed my contract, we've got a book in our hands. Yeah. I do work fast.
On top of another full-time job.
Yes,
too.
on top of another full-time job and motherhood and animals of life, yeah. Yes,
Are you gonna continue painting picket fences?
you know, I gotta find another rejection project. I have another book that is, well, and this is, if you're writing, I highly recommend while you're trying to find a publisher, write another book. So I did that, but I did what you're not supposed to do and write a book related to the book that you're trying to get published, because if that book never gets published, you're in trouble. So while I was writing that book, I was doing this rejection project. I can't say anything right now, but I didn't need to write a rejection or make a rejection project for that book. But my third book, I might have to come up with another. We'll figure it out. I don't know. I'll find something else. I'll get another section of picket fence from the antique mall. Yes. Hi.
You cut out a lot. I'm an emotional person, I'm attached, and how did you get over cutting out, and is there any pieces that you want to share with us?
Yeah, so the novel went from 138,000 to 94,000 words. It's about 100 pages. And what was cut out, mostly that I'm sad about, there's 2 main things. One, that the common person who doesn't know much about the 18th century might be like, wait, what? This is a time of colonialism. This is a time when white European people are trying to take over the world, and that's really what the VOC did. I had part of the plot, a little subplot, when they're in South Africa, one of the first mates on the ship is like, they're not treating these native people correctly. We have to do something to remedy this. I can't stomach this. Had to cut it. It's a really important piece of history. We have to understand that while Clara the rhino was an anomaly to Europe, she wasn't in India. That was a sacred animal to them, called a ginda, praised, worshipped, treated with respect and dignity, even though there were hunters that slaughtered them. So, you know, from a different perspective, if you're looking at it from a European who's never seen a rhino before, it's still a wondrous beast, but so was she to her native peoples where she came from. So that was tricky, and I had to cut it. And it's also complicated because it makes you really question what you're thinking about why Clara was wonderful to certain people and common to others. The other thing that I had to cut was a couple characters. Those people still live in my Steven Spielberg director's cut version that I have saved to my Google Docs. So they're still alive to me, RIP. I literally have their names flashing in my mind right now. But one of them, Dude's backstory about how he got to the VOC as a 15-year-old boy, the publisher actually put that on their website as a short story. You can go read that. So that's really cool. He's like, hey, I don't have a short story this month. Do you remember that huge thing I cut from your book? I was like, yeah, I do. You want it? Sure, no problem. Made nice little cover. So, you know, some of them will live forever, but only with the people who read it early. Yeah.
Were there any moments when you were, because you were doing this research, were there any moments when you found a historical fact or detail in your research that where you were like, oh my God, this is great. This is definitely going in the novel.
Yeah, there were 2 that come to mind immediately. One, Voltaire wrote about Clara and how you can see God in the hide of a rhino. That Clara was proof that God existed on this planet because creatures are made with purpose. That was incredible to me. And I was like, wait. He's not talking about Clara. And I'd look at the dates and then I'd see where he was at that point in time. And I'm like, he totally saw Clara that week. Cool. That's so cool. And the other one was, so there's like all of these documents you can search, they're digitized through archives, and that's been a godsend. But if you type in like the different language words for rhino, you'll have different things pop up. And one of them that popped up was a farmer's journal. That's kind of like a farmer's almanac. He's talking about planting seeds and the weather. And he said, a rhino walked by my farm today. What? She was on her way, you know, the dotted lines. And I just imagine like looking up from your fields, a farmer in, you know, rural Germany, and there's a rhino just, and he just documented it, just one short little sentence in his journal. Those are the kind of snippets. I'm like, did you go see her afterward? And did you talk to her keeper? Or like, did you like, no, you just watched and bye, Clara?
So do you think that Clara walked from place to place?
She didn't walk all the time. So according to the paintings that I've seen and a few other sources, he had a shipbuilder make her the first covered animal carriage in European history. It was massive. She had to have liked it because there wasn't any ever record of her not going in there by herself. So they probably just bribed her with food, honestly. She ate things she wasn't supposed to eat. She loved beer and bread and cigar smoke, pipe smoke, and she ate a ton of citrus, which is not good for rhinos. Anything that you fed her except for meat and radishes, she would eat. So I think they bribed her to get in there. She would walk in parades. The Leipzig Easter Fair, they brought her onto a grain scale and weighed her in front of everyone. And she weighed like 4,800 pounds or something like that. She was a big girl. Yeah, but she was, I never saw a leash in any photos. I did see a couple sticks in some images that she had, but apparently she just at one point had 12 oxen pulling her rolling carriage through the cobbled streets of Europe. That's how heavy she was.
Maybe this is, I'm asking for you, but Ken got one next, but maybe this is a weird question, but do you think that she knew that people thought she was special?
Yes. Rhinos have that sense. Like if you go to a rhino encounter, the rhino knows that there is an encounter and it's like, look at me. Rhinos get the zoomies. They do, they get the zoomies. They're like, oh, is that a watermelon? I recognize that. I know what that is. They absolutely love attention in people. They truly do. And because she was so domesticated from a young age, there's absolutely no way that she wasn't more like a dog. In fact, I found one record where they said that after her performance, which what I assume is just opening her mouth and like maybe rearing back on her leg a little bit, because there's one image of her doing that, she licked her keeper on his face as a sign of affection. And the crowd was wowed by that because again, they had this permeating view that rhinos are man-eating beasts. So, oh yeah, they know they're special.
I have a question about perseverance.
Yeah.
So rejection letter 1, 2, that's disheartening. 10.
67.
Right? And you get to let rejection number 4. Well, what did you draw from? How did you get the inspiration or the willpower to keep on going?
Part of it was that some of the rejections were very kind. They would say things like, this was incredible. I just don't think I can sell it. I don't know how to market this. This is not the type of historical fiction that I like. And that's fine. But beyond that, I think that's why I found the right publisher for this piece, because I'm not writing about me. This is real people. This is a real animal. And if I give up on that, what am I saying about the legacy that they've left behind that needs to be told, needs to be uncovered, needs to be thought about in a collective sense? So I think what really bolstered me forward was not just painting flowers on a picket fence. It was, I'm not in charge of this. This is meant to find a home because this rhino existed in a way that was also basically perseverance. How can you put a rhino on a ship and expect her to live? How can you traipse her around Europe for 18 years, having no idea what she's doing, no vet care, no husbandry information, nothing? It's perseverance through and through. I'm glad it only took me a year, not 18. But yeah, I think that was probably the biggest thing for me. And I'm very stubborn. Very stubborn. Yeah.
Maybe you can't answer this because you've alluded to it. What's next, or where do you find your ideas to generate for your writing?
I've discovered that I'm a historical fiction animal writer. Yeah. My next book is actually about a person that you will meet in the Rhino Keeper. That's a risky thing for a writer to do. But once again, I was seized by a wait, what? that's a real person who did that real thing. And I decided I was gonna write his story as well. So that one I can't talk about. The other one that I'm working on right now, it's ancient. I'm really going back to my early roots in my history days when you have to take ancient history. Luckily, I had a fantastic education, and so I'm able to delve deep into my textbooks that I kept. I get inspiration from true stories that I can't shake. And I feel like there's this little bolt of lightning that just goes, I'm like, why is this not leaving me alone? Why am I dreaming about a rhino or, like a monkey? Like, what is this? Like, why do I have these strange ideas in my head? And this is so, like I said, I'm a romantic. Remember Eddie Redmayne up there? I truly think that sometimes people or things in the past, including animals, are seeking an outlet for their memories to come forward. And if I'm going to be in tune with those things and they're, messages from the universe are going to come and find me for these stories, I'm just going to keep writing until they stop.
Quit your day job.
No, I won't quit my day job. It's funny that you asked that. So I was actually talking to someone about this earlier. I own a bridal store. I've worked in the bridal industry for almost 18 years. I can't do one without the other. Someone asked me, do you want to write a book about Kansas? I said, no, I live here. I don't want to write a book about Kansas. I'm here all the time. I would like to be in the 18th century at 7 in the morning at my dining room table when I'm writing. Thank you. So that's part of my balance in life is I get to escape and then I get to escape. Like if I'm frustrated with my writing, I can go to work. You should see I have this tiny notebook in my purse. I have no idea what I'm talking about most of the time in that notebook. But while I'm steaming a dress or in between gowns with a bride, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just had a great idea. And I write it down. But I wouldn't have that if I was staring at a computer screen all day. So, yeah, exactly.
Have you ever done kind of like a worlds collide, like historical research into like bridal fashion and dressways and stuff like
It's the
that?
same thing about writing about Kansas. Yeah, I don't want to. Okay, if anyone's listening to this on Zoom or anyone in this room wants to do it, I will help you write a bridal market murder mystery. I will give you all the details and all the tea about the bridal designers, but they would know it was me if I wrote the book, and then I would never be able to go back to bridal market. So if you're listening out there and you want that book idea, I'll help you. Don't mention me, just say anonymous source, okay? There's much drama in that industry.
Well, okay, well, is there any last questions? If not, I believe we can adjourn to some more one-on-one type conversations. And Jillian has got books that she brought to sign,
early books.
sell early books. I've also, the library also has a copy here that I'm going to ask her to sign, and so you can also, if you'd like to check this out or put this on hold. So let's give Jillian another round of applause.
Thank you.